Good afternoon, everybody, and Happy New Year. Welcome to a new episode of Capitol View, a weekly webcast brought to you by the Daily Journal and djournal.com, discussing what's going on in the state capitol with the government. And Bobby Harrison, our Capitol Bureau Chief, of course, joining us from Jackson. I'm Brad Locke. Bobby, hope you had a good Christmas and a good New Year.
I did, Brad. I took off a week and traveled just a little bit, but saw some family and had a good time all the way around. Hope you did too.
I did pretty much the same thing, Bobby. Just got back today is my first day back, just in time for the new legislative session. That's what we're here to talk about today. And we were off last week, as y'all know, for the holiday, but we're back today as promised. The new legislative session convenes tomorrow, Tuesday, January 3rd, and will continue for about 90 days, per usual. So, Bobby, there's going to be a lot, obviously, on the agenda to get done, bills to pass, proposals, and everything else. A few big items obviously stand out, Bobby. So let's touch on some of those. First, the state budget. You got to work out. You got to get a state budget hammered out for the new fiscal year that starts July 1st. And Bobby, that we've got the governor's proposal. Phil Bryant submitted his proposed budget. Executive Budget Committee did the same. Legislative Budget Committee, excuse me. So now explain to people a little bit how the process works from here.
Well, I mean, the legislative leadership and the governor submitted a budget proposals last year, as it turns out,
yes.
for the new budget year that'll start July 1st. And the legislature literally began working on the budget pretty early in the session, but it'd be one of the last things they complete. Is a budget. They do that late in the session, so they have a better notion of what the revenue collection is going to be for the upcoming budget year, which, as I said, starts July 1st.
Sure.
But as it stands right now, there's going to be there was a lot of cuts made last year, and it looks as though there's going to be more cuts made this year. Revenue continues to be sluggish. Both the governor's budget proposal and the budget proposal at the legislative leadership, the legislative budget committee proposal, if you will, make substantial cuts to numerous agencies. Mississippi Adequate Education Program, which is a primary funding source, state funding source for local school districts, they leave that about level funded, but a lot of other agencies, universities, Medicaid, but not Medicaid so much, but universities, community colleges, mental health, they're going to have to endure budget cut, absorb more budget cuts during the upcoming year unless revenue picks up in the coming months.
I was wondering how much wrangling we might see or how much pushback, but with the Republicans having a super majority, will this be a relatively smooth process as far as just getting this budget worked out and voted on?
I think it will. I mean, I think that, the leadership last year was, I think, maybe toying with the notion of more tax cuts during the coming session. But and they're still hinting about tax cuts. But I just think it's going to be harder to get tax cuts passed with revenue being as it is, sluggish and has been sluggish for a while. So I just think that they're going to try to do little harm to the budget as possible. The Republican leadership is going to be not keen on dipping into the reserves too much, probably not as much as some Democrats would like. And that may be where the primary fight is. But overall, I think that it's going to be on the budget proposal. It may be painful, the outcome, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of pushback from a majority of the members when everything is said and done.
Another topic that's going to be high on the agenda this session will be campaign finance reform. Bobby, this mainly has to do with using campaign contributions for personal expenses, whether it's something like buying a car, just buying clothes, or whatever, Bobby. And this seems like something that I guess most people on both sides of the aisle would like to see, but there are some concerns too, aren't there?
Yeah, well, I mean, we were in a few states that allow campaign contributions to be used for converted to personal use. Matter of fact, if you retire from office and you have you can just take whatever campaign war chest you have with you and into retirement and use it to buy a condo on the beach or a cabin up at Pickwick or do whatever you want to with it.
Sure.
You just have to pay taxes on it. But we were in a few states that allows that to happen. And it got a lot of media attention last year, and there was efforts during the last session in 2016 to change that. But the House on a voice vote, it wasn't a recorded vote; it was a voice vote. It was a strong voice vote, and it wasn't killed the bill last year, so nothing passed. Both Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves, who has been in favor of making these changes from the beginning, and Speaker Philip Gunn both have said that passing a campaign finance reform bill this year will be high on the agenda. But there may still be some pushback, like it seems clear cut, but like some members say that they should be allowed to do all things. There's apparently a tradition in some communities, Brad, where elected officials use their campaign finance funds to help poor families pay for funeral expenses,
Right.
which some people may think that's a not proper use of campaign finance funds, but you got to admit it's not using the campaign finance funds to line your own pocket. So
Yeah.
so things like that. There's a sentiment to try to protect things like that, and Speaker Gunn makes the point that he thinks that if you're going to travel to if you're a legislator in say Tupelo, you're going to travel to Amory to give a speech to the Rotary Club, you should be able to use your campaign finance funds to pay for that gas. But he says you shouldn't be able to use your campaign finance funds to buy an automobile. So which has happened in the past. So those are the type of things they're going to try to clear up this year, and I would be surprised if something doesn't pass.
Yeah. Got a key word for you here: itemized reports, Bobby. We're familiar with that here at the Journal. If we
Yeah.
we incur expenses, we gotta usually have to send in an itemized receipt. They prefer. I guess it just goes back to more accountability in the end, Bobby.
Yeah, this is something the speaker. I mean, several legislators and politicians do it, and the speaker's been guilty of it on many occasions too. On your campaign finance report, which is a public document, anybody can go to the Secretary of State's office and get copies of the finance reports for
Yeah.
that are due on a regular basis. And but what a lot of politicians do, they just put down paying for a credit card statement. You may put down paying $1,000 on in expenses on a credit card statement, but you don't know what those expenses were for. So they could have been to buy a nice suit. They could have been to pay for that gas to go to the Rotary Club in Amory. They could have been just to buy a nice suit. And so one of the things they want to do in any changes is make not only just you just don't put down you pay $1,000 on a credit card bill. You got to include that credit card statement to show what you're paying for, what the credit card was used for.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be that'll be a key reform in any campaign finance reform that does go on.
Another issue that could crop up, and it's certainly been a major concern for the state, is the state of the highways and bridges in Mississippi, and trying to find a way to fund improvements, because you've got a lot of these roads and bridges, Bobby, are just in bad shape and in need of repair or replacement, and have not been able to come up with a solution to that. And that's the thing. I think a lot of people agree that something needs to be done, Bobby. The problem is, how do you fund it? Because it's going to take a lot of money.
Yeah, it's going to take a lot of money, and there's not the most officials agree that there's not the Department of Transportation, for the most part, runs on federal funds, which are matched by state funds, and those state funds come from essentially an 18.4 per gallon tax on gasoline.
Yeah.
And most people agree that tax is not generating enough money to pay for the needed repairs and improvements to the state's infrastructure. But the problem is that there's not a consensus on where to get that additional money. The Mississippi Economic Council has proposed an additional, I think, $375 million per year to pay for road and bridge improvements. But to come with $375 million a year is going to take a pretty sizable tax increase. and there's just not doesn't appear to be the willpower amongst the majority of the House and Senate to pass a major tax cut to do that right now. We'll see the pressure is put on them during the session to come up with something, but right now it doesn't look like you just can't look and see a clear path forward to come up with the money to pay for those needed improvements right now. So that may continue to be a issue during the 2017 session and on into the next legislative session. Jim Hood, who's a Democrat Attorney General and considered a candidate for governor in 2019, has proposed a lottery to pay for some of these needed repairs, and so we'll see if the lottery gets any traction during the 2017 session.
Well, you mentioned the gasoline tax, 18.4 cents per gallon, and that number was set almost 30 years ago and hasn't gone up, even though cars have gotten more fuel efficient. And so really that's I don't know how much that would help if you can increase that. I also don't know, how many people would get behind increasing that tax.
Right. It was passed in '87 as part of the major '87 4-lane highway program, which is viewed as a watershed legislation in the state's history, and the legislation responsible for a lot of the 4 lanes highways, especially up in Northeast Mississippi. And as you said, that's a 18.4 cent per gallon tax on a gallon of gasoline. It's not a sales tax. It doesn't go up when the price of gasoline goes up. Right. And there's more cars on the road now, but the cars are much more efficient, and so there's just not the tax is just not generating enough money to keep up with the increase, a substantial increase in improving roads and bridges. The cost to do that has increased significantly, up to 200% for some items, but that tax has remained pretty much flat since '87.
Yeah, well, going to be several issues tackled during this session, Bobby. What are maybe 2 or 3 more that you think will gain some traction? Obviously, the state flag has been a hot topic. Might see some. It's
a hot topic, but it doesn't seem to be much. You got Philip Gunn saying he's ready to change it, but it doesn't appear the Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves is on board with that. He indicated that he would not change it without another referendum, statewide referendum, to allow the voters to decide on it. But that'll be an issue. You got revamping the education funding formula that provides state funds to local school districts. That's going to be a huge issue during the upcoming session. That's going to probably be as big as any issue. There's other issues, smaller issues. Hey, you got the issue of whether they can use the demon chipmunk to read bills.
Oh, yeah. Can't forget about the demon chipmunk.
Yeah, with use a computer reading application to read bills at full bore, wide open, where it sounds like been described as a demon chipmunk. The U.S., not the U.S., but the state Supreme Court is still deciding whether the legislative leadership can use that computer reading application on full blast. So there's going to be a litany of issues. There's probably going to be several social issues that come up. There's legislation filed to make sure local schools could use a phrase "Merry Christmas." I don't know what local school district has prevented that from being used, but there's been legislation filed anyway to make sure that they can use that phrase. So there's just all sorts of serious stuff and crazy stuff that will be filed, and we'll see what comes up. Right now I'm sitting in it's very rainy down here. It's dark, and tornado warnings and stuff all around us, and the Capitol is near empty. It's still considered a holiday, but tomorrow this place will be bustling with 174 legislators, lobbyists, media, and everybody else who's interested in this crazy process that happens once a year.
Well, I hope the weather today is not a harbinger of things to come for the session. This first week, Bobby, if you could kind of briefly explain what kind of goes on this first week as the lawmakers get settled in and kind of get things going these first few days.
Probably not much, Brad, to be truthful. Some in the past they would pick 1 or 2. The old leadership, especially in the House, Billy McCoy, when he was Speaker, he'd pick 1 or 2 issues to try to tackle the first couple of days of the session. The current leadership has not done that. They just kind of the usual process during the first few days. The Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor will be assigning bills to committee, so unless something changes, there won't be much action during the first week, but it'll gear up pretty quickly after that. I think the Governor Bryant will have his State of the State speech maybe next week. I'm not exactly sure on that date, but if not next week, the week after that, and then after that, it'll really pick up a good bit after then with the committees meeting to consider bills and all the stuff that goes on with that.
All right. Well, we've got plenty to look forward to there then, Bobby. And of course, y'all can check out Bobby's coverage in the Daily Journal and at djournal.com. And check out Tuesday's Journal. We talked about campaign finance reform. Bobby's got a story on that coming in tomorrow's paper. So check that out. And plenty of coverage coming from Bobby throughout this session. You can follow him on Twitter at Bobby Harrison9. Bobby, as always, appreciate your time here on Capitol View. And we will be back next Monday to talk about whatever has happened and what might happen yet down there in Jackson. Bobby, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Brad. Have a good week.
You too, and everyone else out there, hope you have a good week as well. See you next Monday.
All right.